All right, we're going to talk about the topic of names next. These are variable names, basically, or they don't have to necessarily be variable names. They could be names for methods as well, or even names for classes if you want. Now, some languages have length limitations. That are based on the number of characters that you can use in a name. So I mentioned this before when I was talking about characteristics of good programming languages. So early versions of BASIC, you had one letter and another letter. This is tough to use. Letter / digit. And Fortran 77, you've got 6 characters, and the rest are ignored. C, you got 63 characters. But wait, there's more. The first 31 are significant. And interestingly, C++ is the same as C. And that creates a really interesting problem. In fact, I actually had this problem. So let me talk about the 63 characters with 31 significant. So like Fortran 77, the issue is the first 31 characters count and are used to differentiate one name for another name. If you have two names with the same first 31 characters, and then they differ in characters after the first 31, as far as C and C++ are concerned, those are in fact the same name. And so you can get really weird syntax errors. So I had a situation like that, and I'll show you why understanding a little bit about limitations with names can impact the programming that you do. So take this class here. All right, so a class, and the class is this is a very large class name. Okay? And then I'm going to define some things in the class. So I've got an int, which I'm going to say display ID, and int display age. So I wrote some code like this once that was really frustrating because I got a syntax error that said, duplicate method name, and it said the duplicate method name occurred right here. And so my question is, why did that happen? All right, this is, by the way, this is C++ code, because you wouldn't see this in Java. Java, you'd have you wouldn't have that semicolon. You'd have the code for the method immediately underneath display ID, and the same thing with display age. But in C++, you don't do that. You can do it a bunch of different ways. But one way is you declare the names of the methods and the variables that are going to appear as members in the class in one chunk of code, and then you declare the code for the methods in another chunk of code. So anyway, the question is, why why was it saying that this line of code here, was a duplicate name? And so if you know it, that's great. If you don't know it, hit pause for a second and think about it. And I'll wait for a second. All right, I hope you hit pause and thought about it. So the answer is that this name right here is a total of 24 characters. And this display right here is 7 characters. So 24 plus 7 equals 31. So remember, the first 31 characters in C are significant. Now, why is that important for C++? Well, what C++ does is it takes all of its C++ code and converts it into C code. So C doesn't know anything about classes. And so what happens is that the method displayAge gets converted into a method that's called this is a very large class named displayAge. That's the name of the method. That's how class methods get converted into C methods, which then get converted into code that can execute. So this is a very large class named displayID, and this is a very large class named displayAge, are actually the full C method names that are going to execute. And because C only recognizes the first 31 characters, this is a very large class named display gives me the first 31 characters, and everything else after that is okay, but it's ignored. And therefore, the compiler thinks that displayID and displayAge are identical method names because the first 31 characters, which are significant, are the same. Got it? Hope so. That explanation, which took a couple minutes, that took me maybe 3 hours to figure out. It's quite frustrating. All right. So another thing, if you're dealing with names that you want to know about, are what are valid characters? So in Java, C, and C++, what are valid characters in a name? And you should know this. And you might be able to fill in stuff after this colon. So one thing is the alphanumerics. Any alphanumeric character plus the underscore. That's valid. Fortran 77 is similar. One thing here is you can't start with a number. Okay, so alphanumeric and underscore are fair game, but you can't start with a numeric. In Fortran 77, one thing you have to watch out for is you can use alphanumerics. I'm pretty sure you can't start with a number. I don't think you can use underscore either. So we're going to put down alphanumerics. And but additionally, disturbingly, this is my symbol for the space character. That's okay. You can have variables that have spaces in them. And I don't know about you, but for me personally, I find that kind of freaky. So for example, I could have a variable that's sum of salaries. Holy moly, that just that's not cool. So the compiler is going to ignore the spaces and treat it really as sum of salaries with no spaces between them. But for me, the question I had asked when I look at that code, is that 3 variables or 1 variable? Based on my training, I would think it was 3 variables. So that's sort of interesting. Another question you want to ask if you're trying to learn a new programming language is, how about case sensitivity? So I'll put down a bunch of different languages here. So Java, C, C++. The answer is yes, it's case sensitive. And VB, or so no. So VB.NET, Perl, PHP, ASP, and Fortran are not case sensitive. If you do have a case sensitive language, you really should be careful with the use of variable names, particularly if you're going to use the same variable name, but distinguish it by case. I mean, that's crazy. That makes for a nightmare. So I would avoid that. But it's also important when you have a case-sensitive language to have patterns for when you're going to use particular cases. So, for example, in Java, method names are always lowercase followed by uppercase if you want to break up a name into multiple words. So this is parse int. There's sort of two chunks there, parse and int, and it's broken up by capitalizing the I in int. And also, it's a common pattern to use for constants, like, I don't know, let's say speed is my constant. It's common in case-sensitive languages to use all caps for constants. An annoying exception to this rule is in something like C#. Let's say C#. It's also case sensitive. That's a language that's basically a ripoff of Java that was created by Microsoft. It's actually a really cool language. But in C#, using the .NET classes, you specify the name of methods by capitalizing the name of the first word in the name of a method. So that's kind of annoying. Like Java, C, every other language that C# inherits from does not capitalize that first character. But Microsoft has its own way of doing things. Okay, great. So that takes care of the issue of names. I'm going to stop this right now so we can break this up into chunks.